How would you like me to introduce you?
I just say composer, pianist, and programmer. That's perfect. It kind of flows. Composer, because it's got P's. Composer, pianist, and programmer. It's alliterative, so that it's some poetry there. Thank you for asking. The programming comes from music. That's why I don't really identify at that, but I think I've been able to outprogram many. It's just,
Well, I mean, I see programming and music composition analogous, not opposite, because you're trying to create, patterns in sense, putting it together.
well, let's talk about it. It's an interesting, we'll go wherever you want to go, but if you want to go there, I think it's kind of an interesting area, not talked about very much.
So, welcome everyone. I am here today with composer, pianist, and programmer Anthony Marinelli. Hello.
Glad to be
Nice
here.
to see you across the continent. You were just across the ocean recently.
Yes, super
Yeah.
booth.
Super booth. Super booth looked like a super good time.
It is. It's super.
It's so we were just struggling over how I should introduce you. And that already instigated some conversation. So composer, pianist, and programmer in that order.
I think so. You want to know why?
How about today you are? That's what you are today.
Well, I mean, I try. Yeah, it's like, who are you today?
Right?
Sometimes I want to be an athlete, on a lot of days, but I want to be like whatever I'm doing, the best I can be. So I try to identify with it. I identify with being a composer first, I think. I mean, all of my programming, whatever, like skills have come from my music background, like how I hear sound, and that's how I compose music. And I look at it like I'm composing the timbres, like the instrument that you're going to play, just like as a musical thing. And I'm thinking of it as like where its place is in the soundscape or the score of the music or the song or whatever, the how it's functioning, if it's the bass. And I program that way from a musical point of view, not necessarily, I'm probably not very much from a technical point of view from knowing that. And I've learned that over the years because I thought it was kind of good. It's like composers, you write music and then you look back and then you can figure out how you did it. Like when we look at classical composers, they weren't following the rules, they were making the rules and they were just doing it. And I just kind of do it. And then I'm able to study because I put the time in and figure it out a little bit technically. And then I can explain it in a simple way to myself. And then lately, making videos, I'm able to explain it to other people because I
So
was
you're,
able to explain it to myself first.
so you're deconstructing your own method.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I think deconstruction is like a really great way to understand things. That's how I work with, this piece behind me is I deconstruct. I take a patch that someone's already made. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let's break it.
Well, yeah. And you start with something you care about.
Yeah.
And you're not just doing it like a pedantically, like you go to school and it's like, okay, now we have to do chapter one just because it's chapter one, but it's not relevant to what I'm doing necessarily. And there's a time and a place, for sequential learning. But in the beginning, I like to get something to trigger me, something that I like love or want to investigate. And then like I said, then I'll go back to chapter one and figure out how to construct it again. So that's why I like that sequence. And pianist, I studied a lot of piano and I played a lot of, that's kind of my first instrument, and just playing the synth, I was able to take that stuff and explore like new ways of approaching the keyboard because you don't really play a synthesizer like exactly like a piano. It's similar, but you find that you can do things and get a result on the synthesizer without having to do so much piano technique. But now I love the new controllers because I think we'll be able to put not only piano technique into it, but stuff that I learned from conducting orchestras and how other instruments interface with the musician, like a violin, where there's no like center pitch, for instance, and you can slide freely from one pitch to the other, or you can sustain, infinitely, and you can have immediate vibrato by gestures, because on the piano, it's like whatever, however many gestures you do, like contortion, the piano's just going to decay. It's, you know what I mean? Like you're trying to push the sound forward, but it's just, you can make it sing with your touch, by not bashing it, but the speed of the hammer, but still it's a percussion instrument. So now the synthesizer is getting into some really incredible level of nuance. I'm really excited. This is a renaissance in music, not just in electronic. In my opinion, I think it's a renaissance in music.
Ooh, okay.
Sorry,
Why?
we know each other kind of well, so we
I
can
know, I know.
we can float here. What do you
We'll
want to talk about?
deconstruct. We'll go back in time after we get through this very interesting topic you just brought up, a renaissance in music.
Yeah, I think so.
How so?
New instruments, new technology, spurring new music across different generations. And the access to like learning centers, which this is all like how the Age of Enlightenment was in the 1700s, the classical period, and
Yes.
science was evolving. People were really looking up to that, and we're there now. And like instead of like the encyclopedia or even the classroom, now we have the internet, and you can have and now artificial intelligence, you can get information really fast about it. So it just seems like a no-brainer, and just talking to different generations that are kind of feeling the same thing. There's generations of people older and younger that are all into the same stuff, which I've never seen before. It was usually like, oh, your dad's music and your kid's music, and we kind of hate it, or we don't understand it, at best. But there seems to be a yearning now, and it's like a putting together of what came before us again, because we drift different periods, right? The 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You could look at what was going on in all those periods. But to me, this is like a relook at how we do things, how we look at what an instrument is, how we look at composing. Now people are doing it in different ways, sitting in front of DAWs, or now like Ableton, you can just compose on a freestanding, there isn't even a computer. It's a freestanding pad, and it's expressive, and you're playing buttons. I mean, this is, again, no brainer to me. It's a revolution, and it's a renaissance of in music. I'm there. I'm all there. I'm so excited to be talking to you and talking to people and hearing the things that they're doing, like old and new, and people sending me what they're playing on the continuum of like music of Ernst Korngold, the golden age of film music, being performed with strings and pitch continuum electronic instruments, and it sounds really expressive. So it's unfolding.
It's such an interesting conversation because there was a time where synthesizers were thought of as cold and hard and all, and now I think that the renaissance in what I call classical synthesizers, semi-modulars, vintage,
Mhm.
is because there's a generation that did not have the same tactile experience as working with, a real pitch bend knob, or aftertouch, or understanding where on the surface of the board they plug things in, and it's all that manual dexterity. But at the same point, I think you can be expressive with anything. Look at, yeah.
I just couldn't help it. What you're saying, because with the modular stuff, you literally make connections. You literally do it. And learning that way is invaluable. That's a little pitch to people. Feeling it,
Yes.
like learning, like how the oscillator isn't just there. You go find it, and then you bring it and introduce it to the filter. That's the beauty of modular. New generation of that too. Eurorack is tremendous. Brings it to the people, and then you have like people with imagination creating their own little enterprises, making new modules, and then finding out what flies, and then hearing music on it. That's more of that's Renaissance stuff too.
Enjoying the prospect of how can we merge old and new? How can we take, new Eurorack, new DIY, small boutique companies that are creating these wonderful, beautiful parts, and then connect them with, the older generation of synthesizers. Is it valuable? How can we use those together?
Easy. Control voltage. That's and these new controllers
are, and the world is your oyster.
But there was MIDI, but now there's a lot of stuff going back to control voltage because it's like there's no latency. It's just a voltage, it's just there. And if you send the voltage, and it's interesting how we use digital to kind of get us there, to sort of round up the control voltage. And now all the stuff can talk to each other, like you're suggesting. The new stuff and the old stuff, they're fine together. I mean, look, I don't know, you can see right behind me, right? I got my Eurorack guys right there. And I just take a cable down here and I put it up here, and the old and the new are talking to each other, introducing themselves and finding things like that the old stuff wanted to do, like a voltage controlled envelope or something, which it didn't do. It wasn't built back then.
You spent a lot of time interviewing other people. Let's talk about you. How'd you get into all this mess? You said you grew up playing piano?
Yeah, piano lessons. And then I wanted to quit. But my piano teacher, I took 3 piano lessons a month, so once a week. And then on the 4th week of the month, it was a theory class right from the beginning. So how lucky was that? So that's how I became interested in like composing music. But I definitely just wanted to play sports and quit. It was just not something for me sitting down in one place. So he got me, just figured out how to keep me going, because I guess he liked me and thought I could do something good. So I was washing windows, making good money. I think he was overpaying me. But then when I heard Switched on Bach, in like right when it came out, he played it for me, and he called it a Moog synthesizer. And I thought that was one word, Moog synthesizer. I was like, that's what I called it. And that turned me around. Like I wanted to know how to make sounds like that. And so it was kind of my discovery to, through organs, playing in bands and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's how I got into, how I got through piano. And then I realized, like, oh, this is what I was saying earlier. Now that I found something I really wanted to do, I needed to play better. So then I started practicing piano, but just trying to practice piano all on its own wasn't as fun as, playing sports. But then once I had like a mission, then it became really fun. I was like, no problem practicing tons of hours, and, went through the whole thing. I did it through high school, but then, I finally got a synthesizer. I bought Jerry Goldsmith's ARP 2600s, which is right there. It's right after Logan's Run. I got that. But I was taking, I have to go back one step, taking synthesizer lessons from Clark Spangler, who was a session synthesist. And he was working in the back of a music store that was called David L. Abel Fine Pianos. And it was the place for composers and musicians and, just music people to hang out and get their pianos, but also to hang out. And in the back of the store, David had the franchise for Yamaha, because he sold Yamaha pianos as well as Steinways. And Yamaha said, why don't you sell some of these synthesizers? And then he got the ARP franchise, one of the first ones on the West Coast. I don't know how many there were. And so I was able to go there and play the 2600 before I owned one. And I was doing sessions. Whenever Clark couldn't make the session, he didn't want it to go to like the other guys, so he'd send me his student, and I was doing like Motown sessions with Lamont Dozier and like big names, TV movie sessions where I had to like read music and program really fast on it. And I didn't even have a 2600. I just learned it in the back of the store with him.
Oh,
And
wow.
eventually, now we jump to where I bought one from Jerry, and then I moved forward, and then, you know, programmed for other people, did film scores, got a lot of breaks. I mean, it's a long story, you know, and had a little room in the back of my parents' house because I was pretty young. You know, I was just in my late teens and going in. I was still in college during all this. I was a composition and piano major, so I had to work really hard to do juries and write pieces for the college professors. And then I was doing sessions throughout all of that period in high school, in college. And then eventually, well, because I was making a ton of money because it paid really well then.
Yeah.
And Clark forced me to charge double scale because he didn't want them to just hire me the next time if I was cheaper and halfway good. So I had to charge what he charged. So I made a lot of money. And then I bought a 24-track tape machine, a 2-inch tape. So once I had that, the film composers started coming into the backyard. I had Maurice Jarre back there. I mean, when I was like 20 years old, Arthur B. Rubinstein, Jack Nietzsche,
Oh, wow.
they would all come back because they wanted me to like realize their film music on synthesizers because it was kind of trending, new instrument. And then I got some breaks, and the big break was, I guess, when James Horner's score got thrown out on Young Guns. They said they wanted an electronic Western. And then I scored Young Guns, and that was the #1 movie, you know, and the rest. And I was part of the same age as all those guys in the, you know, in the movie. And I was working with Giorgio Moroder at the time too. So I had to do Young Guns in 9 days while I was doing Over the Top with Giorgio in the day. So I scored Young Guns at night in 9 days on an ARP 20. No, what I had, an ARP 2600, a Super Jupiter, a Synclavier, and a Lindrum, and then a couple of musicians. So once I was able to do that, the studios thought, you know, okay, this guy can help us out. And then I got more and more scores, you know, and I did the first orchestral mock-ups for Quincy Jones and Steven Spielberg. You know, when with the Synclavier, I had a little library that I had created with recorded strings, and I mocked up all the orchestral score in color purple for Quincy, and then there were all these composers writing, and then it would go to Steven, and then he would pick like what they wanted. But that really built up my chops so I could mix and match big synth scores with orchestra. And then I got rid of all my synthesizers for 20 years and just conducted orchestras. I didn't play any synthesizer. I was all in on acoustic music, and that was it. And then after that, I opened up the synths again. Wow, I'm giving you the condensed version. And I was a dad, you know, I hid out. I just wanted to
Busy.
coach baseball and soccer and yeah, just do that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, this is a year ago, I started making YouTube videos for my own channel just because I was a co-host on Stories in the Room. I was asked to co-host this Michael Jackson podcast, interviewing the other musicians on Michael Jackson's Thriller album.
Greg and all.
And to kind of promote that channel, I made YouTube videos on the urging of my son, Dante. He said, just do stuff in the studio. That's going to be really fun. People are going to really take to it. I know what you can do. It's all him. His belief in me. It's like working backwards, right? His belief in me was enough to just get in front of the camera and do it. And those were really successful. So I just kept doing it. And now it's only a year in, really, just through May. I started May of last year making
Wow.
I'm not like, I haven't been interviewing people my whole life or anything. It's just a year. So now I'm talking to you. I'm talking to a lot of people, and it's great. I'm learning like at a lightning speed.
Isn't that great that we never stop learning if we don't want to, that is?
Yeah, it's like working with weights. You can always gain muscle
Yeah,
at any age, 90, doesn't matter. And you're growing, you're physically growing. And I think the same thing is true if you're doing music and learning. Your left, right brain is going, your dexterity, whatever you have, you know, God-given abilities, you're using them and learning. It's life, it's growth, physical, it's literal growth. I think your brain is like more alive when you're doing it.
absolutely. I'm sure they've done experiments where they check your brain waves when you're being creative, listening to music, making music. Um, that is the ultimate Zen moment when you're completely in the present and you're connected with whatever life force you believe in. I think that that's what happens when you're making music and hearing music.
Well, you're definitely connected to something bigger than yourself, in so many ways, even the people that went before you, you know, I can feel it. When I look at this ARP 2600, your dad, it's like, can I talk about that instrument for just a minute? It's such a perfect instrument. One of the things about it is this, you face it like almost like a person. You look at it. It doesn't lay flat, right? And it's really clear to read everything on there. And then there's the flow of audio that goes from left to right. And then there's the flow of the controllers, like the vibrato and the things that move the filter and move the volume, move the brightness in normal terms, right? Change the tone. They're all moving up this way. So the audio moves this way, and then the control signals move up this way. And it's stereo, and the speakers are built into it, so you don't need anything else. You can just have a relationship, put it in front of you, look directly at it, get sound in one in each ear, a speaker for each ear, and then make all the connections yourself on it. It's just a beautifully designed instrument, so much easier to learn on than anything else that I've ever worked on. And then there's a little bit of like, he was nice and put in all the normaling so that you don't have to patch everything if you don't want to.
Yeah.
It's extremely fast. And the fact that it's sliders instead of knobs, I can look at a patch if I see somebody performing on stage, I have my little binoculars and I could look at the patch and I know what the sound's going to be. With a knob, I can't really tell, but it's graphic. It has so many things going for it. Has a handle, a nice case.
You sold me.
With another kid that was studying piano with my piano teacher, Brian Banks, we kind of band together and we started a synthesizer band because David had like a ton of Yamaha stuff, so we could get our hands on a lot of CS80s. So we wrote transcriptions of classical music for 6 CS80s, which I still have. I still have the transcriptions. And we performed it live on classical radio in Los Angeles, KFAC. Live classical music on, so your dad would probably like that. And we actually got a chance to open for the LA Phil at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, and Ricardo Shiley conducted the Rite of Spring after we were the opening act.
Oh,
We did a
wow.
pre-concert. So we really got to a place, but the film stuff was just taking up the time. I mean, I really could have had like a classical a live synthesizer group performing classical music. I think I could have gotten it off the ground. Who knows? But I'm glad things happened the way they did, the film career and then an ad career. I wrote a ton, like 1,000 TV commercials, including the "This Is Your Brain on Drugs" commercial with the fried egg, like
Really?
one of the most famous, and it's
Yeah.
been sampled by multiple Rick Ross, the Gorillaz. Yeah, I had a huge advertising career. I had a big facility in Hollywood. People don't know this stuff. So Apple computers, I did like 30, we won lots of Clios and Cannes Silver Lions and for that work. And then one of the other iterations was I started a post-production company called Levels Audio Post, and I had a big sound stage and lots of employees and engineers. Then we did, because I built it so I could just do my films there and post my films, because I wanted to do one-man mixing with musicians instead of three-person mixing where it's dialogue, effects, and music. I would pick one musician who could mix everything. And with the advent of like Pro Tools, it was a perfect mix. And we ended up getting American Idol for the first 5 years, Bachelor. I think we had 3 of the top 5 TV shows. And then I couldn't get in my own room to do my film scores. So I sold the whole thing, came back to my home studio, and just became a dad. Sat on that for a while. So I don't know, I'm jumping all over the place. But you said you wanted to know my background. I just am going with the flow. When there's flow, I can go. so I do it.
So you were in a synthesizer band that played classical music.
Yeah, that's how we kind of got the early film scores, because the film composers were comfortable because they knew that I could read scores. I could be totally comfortable, scores, parts, arranging, orchestrating. Because I had to orchestrate all these classical pieces, and play them, have the hands to be able to play them. That was a key, the skills to getting the film scores.
So this connection was made because your teacher, your classical teacher, um, it came from him initially?
Well, he introduced me to Brian, and then the two of
Brian
us had
Day.
this idea, yeah, because he knew David too. He was kind of like a second dad to us, the piano store. So we both hung out there, and Brian worked there, and I just was like a student on the weekends with Clark, and we put the band together, the synthesizer thing, and then we got calls, like somebody was a guy named Jeff Benjamin heard our live radio broadcast on a Sunday, and tracked us down and said, I want you guys to realize the score to the movie Blue Thunder. And it was a John Badham film, and he had just done Saturday Night Fever, which is a gigantic movie. And there's a funny story because the studio wanted Tangerine Dream because they were established, and I don't know if they had done a film score yet, but I just found this story out at Arthur's funeral because he passed away, unfortunately, recently, and I loved Arthur. Um, he really meant a lot to me and to my whole career too. But John Badham told me that he gave the studio Brian and my demo tape and wrote Tangerine Dream on it and said, "Well, okay, how do you like this? I'm okay with this." Something like that. And then he said, "Well, it's not Tangerine Dream. I'm going with my guys." And it was all because of Arthur. He battled for, I think I was 20 doing a major studio film, like working for like 9 months on it. So
And this was before Thriller?
yeah. Oh yeah. It was my first really huge thing. Quincy picked Brian and I because we were doing film scores. That's how we got on to Thriller.
Okay,
Because Quincy was thinking remember, Quincy was a film composer
right.
too. And then we're at the advent of MTV. I don't know how much they really could project it, but I know, knowing what I know about those guys, they had to have it at least in the back of their mind that there was going to be music videos or something. So they wanted some film guys to come in and contribute on Thriller. And Brian and I were like we could program and make cinematic sounds on synthesizers. So that's why it was through Tom Baylor, who was the associate producer on Off the Wall. And he was going to be the associate producer on Thriller until he got a Radio City Music Hall job. He wrote She's Out of My Life on Off the Wall, but
Oh,
he recommended us to Quincy. And then Quincy, I continued working with Quincy for quite a few years after that. And then Color Purple and a lot of his other films that he produced and some other record stuff. But it all happened through the orchestrating scores, and then turning that into film scores. And then I got back into pop music with Thriller, and then I got on TV, the David Hartman from, you remember Good Morning America?
I do,
So he came to the back of my parents' house and we were on primetime TV, which was a pretty huge deal
of
in the
course.
early 80s. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty huge deal. And then everybody in the nation saw this backyard thing, and I got called, like, that's how I got all the ads. Everybody wanted a piece of that, can you write music for this? Can you write music for that? And then I just kept building up a big empire studio, but I didn't want to just manage composers, I wrote all of the stuff myself. I was the writer. So I didn't really turn it into like one of these operations like today with multiple composers, whether it's ads or films. I just really enjoyed the writing, and I did as much as I could until I felt that I had done it. I completed it. Then I wanted to spend time with my kids and try to be a dad, like learn what that is.
It's the most important job of all.
It's, yeah, I think it's really important.
After meeting Dante, I could say that I think you're doing a great job.
Well, that's really nice of you to say. I got three others too, so I have a lot of hard work to do and some little ones. Um, but it all adds up. I mean, like where I am now that I get to do this synth stuff again, it's like it's surreal to me. And putting it all together, and hanging with like uh new generation, and really feeling it. It's just it's surreal. I don't know where it's going to go, but I want to do it for long. I don't know. There'll probably be something else later, but that's just feels really good right now.
I see creativity always sort of goes into waves, waxes and wanes in interest. But I feel like if you're an artist, you're an artist, and you find different ways to express that. And sometimes you get interested
Yeah.
in one thing and another thing, but it's all part of the creative process, and that's all part of your own artistic spirit.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like the reinventing of yourself. You're still yourself, but
It's interesting reflecting on my father's musical journey. I don't know how much you know about it. I've talked a little bit about it online. He learned theory too as a young man. And that was definitely one of his major inspirations because he was so technically inclined as well. This is the guy that took apart radios when he was 4 years old and put them back together again. And learning, he was so impressed by the power of electricity, learning musical theory. um, you know, it made sense to him, and it amalgamated into um, what are the possibilities. And I think learning music theory was the clincher in, why we have these things today.
yeah,
Uh,
and the flow of music because there's a flow to his instruments. I really feel connected to that. I know that he has that background. I mean, it shows. It's why they last, why they're being copied now, and why they go for a lot of money. The original ones, they held up, That's how history doesn't know what time tells or whatever. Like,
right.
you don't really know who was a great anything until they stand the test of time.
That's why I've decided I want to start a new movement and stop calling them vintage synthesizers and call them classic synthesizers.
Yeah.
Like a Stradivarius as opposed to a Yamaha violin, for instance. So
Right.
one was made later. It wouldn't have been what it was if it wasn't for the earlier one, but the earlier one is just as beautiful, and maybe more so because of all the different hands that have held it and everything like that. His one of his favorite movies was The Red Violin.
Oh, John Carigliano, right?
Yeah.
What a
So
great composer.
how was it that you felt it was okay to use these instruments, even though you had all these fancy digital things available to you as well? And I'm not saying you didn't use those, I'm sure you did, but it seems like the 2600 has always been a part of your repertoire.
Yeah, I mean that's really my main instrument. And I was really known for synclavier, for getting the big like for it was like a calling card, that this guy's really could perform on the synclavier and program it. FM synthesis was brand new. I had introduced the first digital synthesis to a major motion picture. It's documented in Variety and Hollywood Reporter. I was doing like that kind of digital stuff at a very high level, and the scores were winning Golden Globes and that kind of thing. But throughout all of it, I had the ARP 2600, and I processed the synclavier a lot through filters, you know, because the synclavier didn't have any filters. It was just
Okay.
raw digital hash, like FM synthesis, but which I like the sound of that rawness. It's kind of like the newer FM synthesizers are so clean, even the DX7, but the synclavier is so raw. It's like power guitars. I mean, I really like it. But I still would have to tame it down, for music, so you could get to the raw. I would filter it down, and But the 2600, it was just like something that I could just sit down in front of and make any sound really fast on it. Like whatever is in my imagination, I could kind of make a version of it, even if it's an animated version of it, you know, because it didn't have to be realistic. It just needed to give you that feeling, you know, to transport you into a different place. And I could do that on the 2600. So it just, but I did put, you know, I'm a musician first. And when the calling was to like really dive into acoustic instruments, and this is testimonial to the electronic ones that I kept, but I dumped them all and I would just do orchestra. You know, I did go for a long period where I didn't play synthesizers. And then of course I came back to, because as a musician first, you're just deciding like, well, what do you need to get your message out, what you're trying to say? And that's what happened. And then it changed. And then the synthesizers just sort of came back into my life. And I think I was doing an ad for a Japanese product, and they wanted wind or something to do some shape. And then the engineer said, well, why don't you get out your 2600? Isn't it in the attic or something? Because it was all dusty and it was up there for a really long time. And it worked. I turned it on and it worked. And then I was just like getting on a bike, and I was just, I made the wind and do what it had to do. But then they said, oh, can you make anything else on there? And I was like entertaining them for an hour. You know, I was making every bird's robot, you know, talking, breathing, I don't know, big bass sweeps, just all, I was just making everything, bells, sequences. And then it stayed out, you know, it just popped in my life again. Film composing is so demanding. You know, when you have multiple films at once, you just can't think about too much else. So, but it's a great instrument, and it was the first one I came back to, and it's everything I do is built around it. You know, just is. It's the best one.
We were talking about film composers. I remember meeting Hugo Montenegro, who I believe used our 2500. It was funny when you were saying that a Western with electronic music. So apparently he did use synthesizers in some of his scores. Was there any influences on you for any of the older film
Oh, yeah.
composers? Who are your favorites?
You mean for synthesizer stuff or for anything?
Just for anything.
Oh, there's so many. You know, Bernard Herrmann, Korngold. Those are like from the golden age of, and that's where John Williams, like he was hanging out with those guys when he was really young. John Williams, obviously. I really enjoy the music of Wendy Carlos doing the film scores. That stuff's pretty interesting. You know, the Clockwork Orange, The Shining. Those are like some of my favorite like electronic ones. You know, basically the classic Ennio Morricone, you know, those are the ones that I really admire. And as a film composer, it was kind of another surreal moment because I replaced a score that Jerry Goldsmith, his score got thrown out on this movie called 2 Days in the Valley. Charlize, Charlize Theron. It was her first movie. It was like kind of a break-in movie, but it was with amazing cast. 2 Days in the Valley. You could check out the movie, but Jerry Goldsmith had scored the movie, and then I replaced the score. You know, it wasn't a synth score or anything, but and then I also replaced the score by Ennio Morricone, which was kind of surprising, you know, but it happens. Jerry Goldsmith told me at one time, you're not a real film composer until your score's been tossed. Because it's what happens. You know, if you've done enough, eventually they're going to, you know, run you through the mill. But those were like the people it was like, had really admired and studied their music with friends too. We would like listen to their scores and keep rewinding and like, look what he's doing here with these strings, and mostly from an orchestral point of view, because I applied all the orchestral stuff to synths, you know, because they could do more. you could write way more actively and turn on a dime with acoustic instruments. The synths are way more clunky, but I wanted to push them to do as expressive stuff as the real orchestra whenever I could.
So what is the difference between using a synthesizer for percussion as opposed to electronic drums or, you know, drum machine?
I don't know if there's really that much. I mean, the drum machine, you just kind of have your fixed palette of sounds for the most part. You can't change the sound so much. But, it's about the pattern. It's like, well, whatever the part is, to me, that's always the most important thing. Like, not even this, how great the greatest synth sound in the world if the music isn't any good. So if the part's really good, I don't really care what it's on. If it's a good percussive part, that's what I prioritize. And then you can just interchange it. Like, I might improve the kick. I might keep the drum machine and add some more low frequency to it, or I might just replace it entirely. I've got this Dr. Click here that I did a ton of that kind of stuff. I would even replace like live drums because you could has a recorder in it, so you could record the whole live drum track with the drummer's feel, whoever the
Yes.
drummer, and you can also mask out if it's just a multi-track, only the kick drum or the snare. And then I would make a new version of that instrument on the ARP 2600, and then we would, record it on a separate track, and then they might mix it together or just use this, just use the synthesized one. So, sonically, you have more choices when you're making it yourself. Could make it live and change and be just expressive in different ways. But I just think that the part is the most important thing, and then you just kind of go from there, But playing it is great when you can, even the electronic sounds, if you can trigger them by hand. But but it's a different feel. And I use like with the Dr. Click, it's machine triggered. I can either use a drummer's feel or I could just go ahead and use the machine feel. And then all these buttons here, I don't know if you can see these buttons,
I can.
like these buttons. Let me zoom in. Those buttons. So you can see I have quarter note, eighth note triplet, 16th triplet. And I can just change rhythms live, on the fly. So you can get machine feel that changes really on a dime. So experimenting with things like that, drum machines, back then those machines couldn't do that kind of stuff. So I could get the machines to do more advanced things just by bringing in new machines, I guess.
How did they do the creaking, the opening, the beginning of Thriller?
Oh, well, Quincy just called a guy up that does sound effects for film. There's like a full-on sound effects guy. I did the wind, but a lot of that stuff is just real sound effects.
So somebody take Mike's a creaking door?
Yeah, it was part of the sound effects library from whoever he called, from one
Gotcha.
of the studios. That's Quincy. Could just pick up the phone and get Vincent Price to come in and then get sound effects guys. And we mixed and matched it with stuff that I was doing here, effects on the 2600. The 2600 plays the theremin. It's not a real theremin. It's a keyboard played theremin, and Greg played it. Greg
Yeah.
Filling. But those ideas happened on the spot, and the pipe organ was synclavier. Yeah, I think I tried to do a howl or something. Woo! That didn't stay. But the opening falling star sound did. There's a drum fill, that falling star,
Yep.
that's what Michael was calling it. So we just made sounds, just being creative. It could mix and match, in other words. Like if it was a sound effect and then real wind, fake wind, just whatever stirs the emotion and follows the shape of the music the best.
Did you have any idea when you were working on that album that it would be the album that it was historically?
I don't think anybody did, but they were pretty sure that it was going to do really well, because Off the Wall. They were trying to beat Off the Wall. There was like a conscious effort. But then I heard Quincy talking about things like, we want to sell records to not just the kids, but to the to the parents and the grandparents. And they actually pulled it off, and they did it over multiple generations, 40 years. I don't think anybody knew that it would have that relevance 40 years later, that it would still chart when they re-released it. I don't think any other album's done that. I'm not sure, but it's Michael. It's something really special about Thriller because it's Michael emerging as a true artist, because Off the Wall he was still a performer, and but on Thriller he was an emerging artist, and it was kind of his first chance to really show the world what he could do and see if it sticks. But he had the team with him. He had a system. I've heard a lot of times like why Michael Jordan won so many championships is when he had a system. He had Phil Jackson with the triangle offense. And when the triangle offense came to the Lakers, Kobe won championships because there was a system to work in. When Michael had Quincy, it was a system. It was like having Phil Jackson. And then later, when Michael was doing albums where he was trying to do everything, he didn't have the system. And it's a little harder. I think the perfect storm was Thriller, where Michael was the emerging artist, but he had all of us, the specialist at every, because I was like a spec among many other specs that just supported Michael and Quincy and that vision. But we were the best spec of that thing that we, did. And that was because of Quincy, that he could bring all this to the artist who was Michael. So that kind of seeing that, I was like wise enough to see that. I figured, wow, I hope this team stays together for a really long time. But it's how it is. It doesn't always stay together for one more album. And then the songwriting started changing and that sort of thing. So it was just a perfect blend where Michael could be a songwriter, but he didn't have to write everything. And the arrangements, there was just a masterful arrangers, Rod Temperton and Jerry Hay, and the contribution of the players was just so incredible. What Greg would add to it, and then everybody else, Paul Jackson and Louis Johnson and Dugu. Now I'm going to risk missing out on names and stuff, and all the keyboard players and other synthesizer players too that were on, and other keyboard players. It's just it was really a team effort. So it was definitely destined for greatness, but who knew 40 years later.
In the analogy of this team creation you just referred to, because you mentioned when you were young, you just as soon be out playing, team sports as programming synths. Can you name any other teams, groups that you worked with, ensembles that of note in your career?
You mean like at that level?
Yeah.
Nothing at that level. But, a little bit of being part of the Quincy Steven Spielberg thing, the way they tried to break new ground doing that, with composers and casting composers, like having multiple composers for one film. That's the first time I'd ever seen that. And then other people have done that, Hans Zimmer, they have like there's tons of composers that work on the music, and those are systems, and you can see why they have so much longevity and work so well. They're like machines, and it's really hard for, like, if the team analogy sticks, for others to even compete with it. It's because it's powerful when everybody finds their role and wants to stay in there in that lane, whatever you're doing. It doesn't happen very often. Just think about it. Like, it happened for Michael Jordan once. He didn't win anything, and he was leading the league in scoring for years, and for 6 years. He didn't win anything until he got Phil Jackson as a coach and had a system. And that was it. And the Lakers, once they lost Phil Jackson, it kind of like not a lot happened. You know, the Boston Celtics were a system. You could just look at different, you know, I know a lot about sports, so I could go through all this kind of stuff. But there's systems even in fishing. And that's what you try to do, I think, when you it kind of finds you though too. It's a combination, you know. I would definitely would yearn for that. Maybe I'd like to try to create my own thing now for people to work. I mean, that would be an ideal thing to be able to mentor this into that where I can have some synthesizer related thing and music related thing and guide it in that way. I mean, that's really inspiring to me to try to be the point person for that, you know, for the whole synth community.
So let's create a dream team. If you scenario, someone calls up Anthony Marinelli and said, I want you to get the dream team together for this next blockbuster.
I mean, for a film,
Yeah.
the actors?
No, the team of composers and sound designers and players.
Wow. I'm not sure I know the people now that, because I honestly would be looking for the next Michael Jordan, not the already existing person, you know, like the young.
The young generation.
I think so. I mean, this is answering your question. Where would I go? That's where I would go. I don't think I would go to somebody that's already has their own thing, you know, and then expect them to sort of just say, you're only going to be like D and 3, you know, which in basketball, it means you just play defense and shoot threes, 3-pointers. You don't handle the ball. You don't do anything like we tell you what's happening. So you got to find people that are up and coming that can thrive in a role. I mean, that's what Thriller was. Like, I was 22 or 23. So Quincy didn't pull in 60-year-olds. So if you think about it, you wouldn't do that if you were trying to build a system. That's not how those things are done, you know. And then you come up in it, and then all those people, the system's so good, all those people go on and have these gigantic careers. They all go on in their own way and make a mark, you know. I mean, Giorgio, okay, I did have an opportunity. Giorgio, I worked for Giorgio for like 8 years as his arranger and programmer. And I got to do like the Seoul Olympics and the World Cup, you know, opening ceremonies. These are gigantic things. And then I worked on a lot of films with him and a lot of hit singles, you know, with whoever, whatever artists were there, you know, and I just learned from Giorgio, but he had the whole thing. He had his studios, and there were specialists that did all this stuff, the songwriting team and lyricist, and he knew how to line people up. And I definitely stayed in my lane with Giorgio and he got all the best people, and he knew what he needed and he knew what he didn't need. And if you didn't fit in, it was just like, you know, this doesn't work. You don't see their face again. But the people that were making it work, but it was all young people. And what a generous person, you know, would give us keys to his Aspen house, you know, to you. I mean, really amazingly generous person. I owe him a lot, and I learned a lot from him. So I got to be part of 2 systems like that were at the top of their game, championship teams.
Very cool. While
Really
you're
fun.
talking, I suddenly visualized that how you could take one of your favorite plays in some championship and create a soundtrack for it. Instead of the people cheering and the person or maybe some cheering is necessary, but yeah. Basketball to me is very graceful, you know, they're floating in the air sometimes when it's amazing to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also very much like a moment of truth when you have to like perform. Like, let's say you have to hit free throws and the game's on the line, and it just goes silent in the whole arena, and you're sitting there and just basically like a skimpy little shorts and the top, with all the lights on you, and you know, you got to be 2 for 2. It's similar to music, to perform, you know, or like an Olympic sprinter where you're just running the 100-meter to be the fastest human like that day. And you have one chance and there's just no margin of error, and your nerves, you got to get out of the gate. And that's music. It's the same. It's really similar, but you just have to believe in yourself and just don't let those demons or whatever, your family and all this stuff, people that say you can't do stuff, you got to kill it. It's got to be killed. Those things that keep us from meeting our dreams and our potential, and you just die failing like all the greats.
Yep.
You just learn that that's the best exercise you can do.
This is great. Thank you so much.
It's always great spending time with you, Dina. Thank you. And for all the work you do with our foundation and your love for all of us, you know, that you've met through your dad's work, and for the instrument, for synthesizers, I mean, and for the next generation.
For the next generation. Here's to that next generation. Here, here. So I definitely, I thought it would be fun if you could tell me how to do a patch.
What do you want to make?
What do I want to make? Let's make an organ set. We were talking about classical music.